Huzzah and good day, my wonderful students. With this particular slideshow, we are looking at the beginning of the American Revolution, uniting for independence. The colonies on their own. Now, basically, the colonies had been created for the benefit of England. That's pretty much what all the colonies were for all the different empires of Europe. They were 3,000 miles away and basically governed themselves. They weren't as profitable as England had hoped. This worked well until about the mid-1700s. Now, George III became king, and he thought the colonies needed more control. The French and Indian War was a war between France and Britain for control of North America. Now, Britain won and had a large debt to pay. So, because the war had been fought to defend the colonies, the king expected the colonies to help pay for it. Certainly nothing unreasonable at this point. So the British government passed new taxes on the colonies to pay for the war debt. The colonists protested, however, and boycotted the British goods. Their main concept was the idea that the British government did not allow them representation in Parliament, and therefore they could not be taxed by Parliament. So, with the boycotts and the protests, the British government kind of backed off a bit. They repealed some of the taxes, but they replaced those with other taxes. The Boston Tea Party happened in protest to a tax on tea. So Parliament at this point decided it was time to get tough with the colonies, and they passed the Coercive Acts, what the colonists had called the Intolerable Acts. Now these acts basically took away the right of the colony of Massachusetts to govern itself. Now, before this, many colonists had thought of themselves as just a member of their particular colony, either Virginians or New Yorkers or Massachusetts men and women. But this changed, and they increasingly thought of themselves as Americans, as part of this shared struggle against the crown. So, in 1765, 9 of the 13 colonies sent representatives to a meeting called the Stamp Act Congress to organize protests about the king's actions. They said that only colonial legislatures could impose direct taxes because they had been elected by the people. The committees of correspondence were basically groups of people who wrote letters to keep people in touch with each other, main important people in the colonies. So, after the Intolerable Acts were passed, the First Continental Congress was called. The colonies agreed on an embargo, basically like a mass boycott against England and a boycott of British goods. So they refused to sell goods or ship goods to England, the mother country, and they refused to buy British goods. George III said at this point the colonies are in a state of rebellion, and force would be used to stop them. So April 19, 1775, the first battle of the Revolutionary War occurred. Now, the Declaration of Independence was written, obviously, in 1776. Once the war started, the independence movement grew quickly, and Thomas Jefferson was commissioned by the Continental Congress to write the Declaration. It was approved July 4th, 1776. Key parts. It used the ideas of John Locke and other philosophers, stated that government was based on the will of the people, popular sovereignty, and it described basic human rights and listed a series of complaints against George III. Actually, most of it is a series of complaints against George III. So, the states adopted new constitutions or converted their colonial charters into constitutions during or shortly after the Revolution. Many of these contained bills of rights and recognized the people as the source of governmental authority, again going right back to the social contract of John Locke. And that is the end of this slideshow.